This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, a leading international professional body advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Felicity Dwyer. I'm a coach, facilitator, trainer, and author of Crafting Connection. In this series, I'm delighted to introduce you to coaches and educators who bring their expert and varied perspectives to the theme of working with the whole person in coaching. We'll explore psychological frameworks and practical approaches that can help you increase your impact as a coach. This episode is a panel conversation with Aubyn Howard, Krista Powell and Rachel Blackman. We talk about the importance of coaches taking a holistic whole person approach and what that means. We look at some of the ways that coaches can work effectively with a whole person in front of them. We consider some of the ethical and contracting issues that coaches need to keep in mind. And panellists reflect on ways that coaches can develop themselves to enable them to work at more depth and breadth with their clients. This was a rich conversation, and I hope you enjoy the episode. I believe the most powerful and effective coaches work with the whole person. They help their clients to tap into and integrate wisdom from their body, mind, and emotions so that they continually learn and grow in their capacity to make decisions and make an impact in their work and lives. We're in a period of deep and rapid change, and whatever their role and sector, leaders are called upon to bring as much awareness and capacity as possible into their leadership for the benefit of their teams and organisations in a complex and changing operational environment. And in the personal coaching sphere, we are all called upon to adapt to changes happening around us, with issues such as climate change, growing inequality, mental health concerns, financial instability, war, and the exponential growth of AI having an impact on how we navigate our lives. So welcome to Aubyn Howard, Krista Powell and Rachel Blackman. To start the podcast, I'd like to invite you all to introduce yourself in a couple of sentences, just to give listeners a sense of the expertise that you're bringing into this conversation. And listeners, you may have already heard one-to-one interviews with these people, or you may be meeting them for the first time, in which case, of course, I encourage you to go back and listen to their one-to-one conversations. Aubyn, are you happy to start?
I'm very happy to start. Thank you, Felicity. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm the director of something called Psychosynthesis Coaching Limited, and we run coach training and accreditation programs. And we do that mainly for professionals who are independent and come to us to get the training and accreditation. And we also do that in-house for organizations. And I'm also director of coaching at the Institute of Psychosynthesis. So we run an MA in psychosynthesis leadership coaching. My background is 30 years of working in organizations, probably more than that, 40 years. And as a consultant, as a facilitator, as a coach. And I started out in this path, I would say, in the mid-90s when I took a master's in change agent skills and strategies with the Human Potential Research Group, founded by John Heron. And then from there, I went into the next major program I did was with the Institute of Psychosynthesis and did my MA in psychology there. So that's a bit of background, probably too much, but I hope that helps.
Thank you, Aubyn. Krista.
Hello, lovely to be here. I'm Krista Powell and I'm based in Wrexham, North Wales, which is quite on the map. I used to have to say I live near Chester, but now Wrexham is famous in its own right. I'm a coach, trainer and facilitator. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and that has bearing. I'm an HR professional. My specialism is in building confidence and credibility, focusing on the workplace. I'm passionate about people being able to achieve their potential. So it's what has to happen to help people perform as they can do. I'm currently finalising my first book, which seemed an excellent idea at the time, but coming to the end of that, and that's been a learning curve in itself. which is entitled Credible HR, How to Get Heard in HR, that HR builds trust, has influence and impact in the organisation. And my passion is essentially HR making a positive impact on the workplace, so workplaces are more effective people, more places to be.
Thank you. And Rachel.
Hi, Felicity. Thank you so much for having me today. What an exciting, really looking forward to the conversation. My name is Rachel Blackman. You can probably hear from my accent. I'm from Australia originally, but I'm based in the UK now, down a little bit south of London in a town called Brighton. I am a body-oriented coach and a trainer, and I teach coaches to work with embodied intelligence at a place called the Somatic School. And I've been doing that. I've been teaching coaches to work with embodied intelligence for about 11, 12 years now. My background originally was, my first training was as an actor. It was about 21 years ago, dare I say it, in Australia, a long, long time ago. And then I trained as a Feldenkrais practitioner. So my background is in the arts and somatic education, and that kind of brought me kind of through the back door into the world of coaching, which is kind of mostly where I work now. And I'm also a facilitator. I do my own work, and I also work as a consultant in lots of different areas. I'll stop there, but really grateful to be here today. Thanks, Felicity.
Thank you. And thank you all for bringing such diverse and interesting perspectives to this conversation. I'm really excited. So we're going to crack on straight away with the first question. So I'd love to know, firstly, how important is it, do you think it's important, for coaches to take a holistic whole person approach? And what do you think it means to work with the whole person?
Thank you for those questions, Felicity. And I'm smiling a bit because they're very big questions, and I will attempt to answer those. I don't know how much time I've got to answer those, but I'll attempt to give an answer within the time. And I think where I'd start, obviously all of us here are here because we resonate with the idea of working with the whole person in some way or another. And I think there's also resonance with the way that the world has been changing and what has been called for, particularly from people who want to be coached or who are going to coaches or who are asking for coaching. Or even if they're not asking for coaching and they're in organizations and they're offered a coach. I sense, and I think we talked about this when we did our first session, I sense there's been quite a seismic shift in terms of what people want, what they bring to coaching and what they expect from not just coaching, but their work lives and their whole lives. And in many ways, you know, in the past, I think we all probably grew up in a time when it was okay to compartmentalize or to split ourselves and to be one person at work and another at home. And that was all part of the way in which, you know, the paradigm and the context worked. And I think that's shifted, particularly with the pandemic, particularly with what we call the VUCA world of complexity and uncertainty and ambiguity and volatility, and what it's like to really to be able to sustain yourself in the work that you do. And I think that takes a whole person approach. So that's my first answer to that question. I would always say, and that it's always context specific. So it always comes down to, you know, how the coaching has come about. Who is the person that is asking or has come to the coach? And what is the contract, and what is the situation that has given rise to that? And what is the capacity of the coach? And then what is the awareness, and what is perhaps what are the expectations of the coachee? So all of those come into play. So it may not be, you know, from day one and from moment one that you're talking about working with the whole person, but that comes into the room. And that's perhaps what we're encouraging coaches to hold in the space that they create with the coachee.
Thank you.
And then to answer the second part, is that okay?
Yes. So what do you think
so
it means?
I thought about this beforehand, and it's something I often address because working with the whole person, I mean, it's a wonderful phrase. And I think it's interesting that we're talking about whole and wholeness and moving away from partiality and splits and working in very compartmentalized ways in our lives. And there are downsides to that. It'll be interesting to hear what comes up when we talk about the boundaries and the ethical dimension of that. But having said that, we can mean quite different things by working with the whole person, or who is the whole person. And for me, I would just highlight three sort of key levels in terms of what we might mean by that. I think at one level, we're working with the whole experience that someone has in the space, in the coaching situation. And you mentioned it earlier. We're working with the body. I'm really pleased to hear about the work that Rachel's doing. And we're working with the body has finally been allowed back into the workspace. And I think, and it's really significant. We spent 20 years allowing feelings back into the workspace with emotional intelligence and starting to talk in that way. But now we're also allowing the body back into the workspace, or into the coaching space. So it's the body, the feelings, and the mind, and the more than the mind as well. And, that's what perhaps psychosynthesis addresses and speaks to, which is not easy, but, including all of who the person is and what they're experiencing, I'd say at one level. So we ask questions. What are you feeling? What was that happening in your body? We can include that dimension. At another level, it's all of what's happening in the lives of the people that are coming into coaching. So it's not just what they're experiencing in the space, in the coaching space, but it's also what is happening in their lives. So I would, and I heard this again, I would use the polarity, whatever it is, the dichotomy of the inner and the outer life. And in a way, we're always, I think what's happening more and more is we're moving between the inner and the outer. And that's a lot of what the coach does, is to help the coachee to see the relationship between their inner lives and their outer lives. And some people go very easily and quickly to the inner life, and others don't. And others may find it more difficult to look at what does that mean in terms of how they show up in their lives and how they take what they're trying to create for themselves into their lives. So there's that level of the inner and the outer, the personal and the professional, the private even, and the business. And is it safe? I mean, again, this comes into the contracting and boundary issues. Is it safe to bring that into the coaching space? And that's, of course, what the coachee needs to create, is a safe space for that. And often I find that coachees may not bring any of that in to begin with, and then it may come in later. So it reflects both the space and the trust that you create. And then for me, there's another level of which is more a psychological level, which is more a level of psychology and consciousness. So there's also the level which is then taking us into what is not even in the conscious experience or the conscious mind of the coachee. So, and you know about the model of the psyche, the egg diagram that Saggioli created for psychosynthesis, in which we talk about the personal, which is our day-to-day experience of who we are at the level of personal psychology or humanistic psychology, but also the pre-personal, what's coming up from our history, what's coming up from perhaps what's been suppressed or repressed in our consciousness, but also the transpersonal, which is the higher aspects of ourselves and perhaps the higher energies that we can connect with. So all of that can come into the space, and all of that for me is also part of what we include in the whole person. And then there's everything outside of that, which is the collective unconscious, and that's where it gets complicated. And I have one more piece to that, and it's funny because this is central to how we work in psychosynthesis, and a lot of what we then speak to in the psychological space is actually what we would call the being. So, and that's where it's difficult, because it's beyond our sort of mental or cognitive mind and our capacity to break things down and analyze what is the whole person. It's actually, who is this being? And in a way, we can only get there by reflecting or wondering or being open or curious to that. So we're also working with the being of the coachee, and I think that's central to the way that we work.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for starting us off with that very thoughtful introduction to the topic. And I think there's lots there that we can pick up on in the next few questions. But before we move on, I would love to hear from you, Rachel.
Yeah, lovely. Wow, that was rich, Aubyn. There's a lot there. Thanks for getting the ball rolling. I think my response to that question, it's a great question and a really important one. And I think my response to it, coming from a body-oriented lens, would be, I come back to that Carl Rogers core conditions. The person in front of me, the being in front of me, is creative, resourceful, and whole. And if we think about that at the level of like a nervous system informed approach, our job as the coach is attunement to the creative, resourceful, and whole being in whatever moment they're turning up, in whatever they're present to. And that includes context. So if we think about the nervous system from this new ancient field of interpersonal neurobiology, we now know that we are nervous systems that are interpersonal. So the person in front of me is also their context. You talk about context, Aubyn, and we are feeling, sensing, perceiving, and our nervous systems are interpersonal. So they're kind of designed to be in communication with other nervous systems and our external environment and our inner world. And all of that is a synthesis. I love this word, synthesis. I'm going to start using it more. Of all of those influences that you described, Aubyn. And so my question, like as a coach, in terms of your beautiful question, how do we work with the whole person, is I want to be a nervous system that is resourced enough to be able to be present to, create a generative space for the emergent moment in that person's moment. That's what I would like to be doing as a coach. I hope that doesn't sound too woolly, but I feel like I might leave it there because it sort of feels simple and complicated at the same time.
Yes. Beautiful, Rachel. Thank you so much. Krista, what are your thoughts?
Lots of similarity, which is brilliant. The simple question too is, how important is it for you to take, as a coach, a holistic, whole person approach? A two-word response is absolutely essential. So that's what I came up with first of all. Aubyn was talking about the three levels, and what occurred to me is the two systems came to mind. So the first system is the person. So the whole person impacts on the whole person. So in terms of your performance, you've got your beliefs, your values, your behaviours, your skills, your mindset. So this whole person system is there that needs to be considered. And also the second system was that people are systems within systems. So as you mentioned, Aubyn, the context is so critical here. So, they are a system, they're part of a system. So they all interact. So that's essentially why it needs to be considered. You can't just take one item in isolation. They all impact, they all interrelate. So it was lovely hearing the different systems and different level approaches, because absolutely. And the second part of the question, working with the whole person. I mean, I loved Rachel's generative space, because absolutely, got a lot of time for enabling this environment for the coachee to achieve what the coachee wants to achieve, and how important that is, that space. My view was, my thoughts on this was being aware that the whole person impacts. So, the system, their own system, the systems they're in are going to impact. Being aware of that, being aware of sensitive areas. I very much feel that as coaches, we really have to be thinking about the ecology and ethics in terms of, for example, questioning and being very, very gentle. Giving a phrase I've written is, go lightly as you possibly can in any interaction. Don't go deep. It's really going lightly until it's appropriate. And to work with the whole person. Four thoughts came to mind as you use sensory acuity, you have flexibility, you need to be building rapport, and you need to focus on outcomes. So those are the pillars of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, if anybody's aware, but I think they're very relevant and appropriate to coaching.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you all for bringing those ideas in. And I've got that sense of the whole experience, the inner and outer, what the coach brings in their capacity to hold that generative space, the importance of the systemic that you brought in there, Krista. I feel there's so much richness there. I think this episode will merit re-listening. So that's wonderful already. Just want to open up, if anybody has anything specific that they'd like to just add in response to what they've heard.
You shouldn't have asked that, Felicity, because you immediately provoked something for me in response to hearing the others. And because I think these conversations build. And it's interesting because I started with the individual and then I came to the nature of being, which is not so tangible and so easy to connect with, but it's there in the space in which we coach. And, you know, that we're working with the being because we're working with the whole person. And then I really realized from what Rachel was saying and we're working with that being in relationship to other beings. You know, we are relational beings, and that is now increasingly seen as part of who we are. We're in relationship, that relational reality and space that we're working with. And then what Krista brought in with connecting us to our systemic context. And we can't see ourselves in a way, you can't see the whole human being outside of a systemic context and the systems that we are part of. You know, and suddenly we're going from, hey, just working with an individual in an experiential space and in the different areas of their lives, we're suddenly working with this incredibly complex reality. And again, some of the new developments and discoveries that have been made that are helping us work in those ways. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Aubyn.
And how do we stay curious and kind with that? Like, how do we stay curious, receptive and kind to all of that complexity as the coach? Is an interesting, inquiry, right?
And maybe that's the place to move on to the second question, which I think speaks to what you've just contributed, Rachel. And I'd love you to start the round of thoughts on this one. And what do you think are some of the ways that coaches can work effectively with the whole person in front of them?
There's so many layers to this. As I was reflecting on this question and digesting it, there's so many avenues I could take. And I decided that I might fold back into my area of expertise, I guess, which is body orientation, which takes me back into the nervous system. And we know that our presence is more important than our intervention as a coach, right? We know that sits way upstream of what we're actually doing or what tools or techniques we're bringing in, right? And from a nervous system perspective, that means tending to your own resource directly influences your presence, how resourced you are on the level of nervous system, which might be things like being hydrated and having the right light and, having a quiet room that's private. And it might also be about how settled you're feeling in yourself, how much of a center you're able to be in yourself. All of these things they're felt in the experience of our clients. And so in terms of what we could do as a coach, as well as attending to our own resourcefulness in order to enhance our quality of presence, because that has an impact, a bigger impact than anything else, right? There's also a little bit of science that might be interesting to consider for those of you who are interested in such things, who like to geek out on such things. So we've got these two different kind of ways in which nerves operate in the body. There's the efferent nerves and the afferent nerves. And efferent nerves are the myelinated ones. You think of E exiting, they exit the brain and they go to the body. They kind of communicate from the brain to the body. And they're quick, and they're really good at results-focused, quick decisions. And afferent nerves are the ones that come from the body to the brain. And they take more time and they need space, and they're a little harder to listen to, especially if we're in a sort of performance mode. So that piece about taking time, be a little slower, do a little bit less, maybe feel what that's like in your nervous system just as you're hearing me say that. If we go too fast to the efferent performance-focused questions our clients can tip into performance mode or kind of feeling like they need to achieve things before they've had time to be with the afferent experience, which is that sort of invitation into the deeper generative processing part. Just that invitation to, in terms of the question, like, what does it mean to invite to work with the whole person? An invitation that as a coach you might offer space for both of those aspects to be true, and somewhere in the center of your you, there's a place where that generative, deeper listening can take place, where the afferent nerves can be taken into account. Might be a way in. So I just wanted to just leave that there, because there's quite a lot in that, and there might be some stuff that my colleagues here want to pick up and bounce back around that.
Thank you, Rachel. Krista.
I was just reflecting how you learn something new all the time. So I've made a note to look that up, Rachel, because that sounds fascinating. And my response is, I suppose, a little more prosaic. I really think, like Rachel mentioned, you start with you in terms of making sure you're as effective as possible for whoever you're coaching. And I'm going to change what I actually wrote, because I wrote a few things, but I'm going to actually put it into a context, which is I like to use a framework called the logical levels, neurological levels. And I have a true story of when I met Robert Dilts. When I say I met Robert Dilts, he was doing a session on modelling at a conference. We were all in the room waiting for him to come in. And I happened to look behind me to where the door was, and in walked this most amazing looking man. I just thought, wow, who is that person who's walked in? And it was Robert Dilts. And what I was struck about was how somebody was completely congruent and aligned in what he was about to do. And he is the person who came up with this model. And the model, I'll go through the way. So the starting point, I suppose, in terms of coaching would be knowing your purpose. So if I'm wanting to work effectively with the whole person in front of me, what is my purpose? What am I there to do? And that's the starting point. And from then I would think about, well, what's my identity here? Obviously, I'll be a coach, but also I'm an HR professional, I'm a woman, I've got lots of different identities. And how is my identity serving my purpose? And then the beliefs and values. So what beliefs and values will help me achieve my purpose? What beliefs about, for example, that the coachee has all the resources they require, that they need, and that my role is to help them explore them. Then what capability and skills will be required to achieve? And that's my capabilities and skills, things like my questioning skills, listening skills. And then how am I going to behave? So what's my behavior? What behavior will help me serve my purpose? And then finally, the environment. So what environment will help the purpose be achieved for my coachee and for me to do the job I need to do, the role I need to do? And certainly he was absolutely congruent in that you could see his purpose in his aura almost about him. So he was completely congruent. So it's very much about thinking about elements. And I mentioned a few things that are part of those levels, which is, for example, using rapport and gaining clarity, speaking in using open questions, using maybe clean language, which is language that is a tool to help them explore. But certainly that model of the logical levels, the neurological level alignment, really helps me make sure I am sort of hitting all the bases.
Thank you. And that example of you meeting Robert Dilts sort of picks up that point about the presence, when somebody is really aligned and presence and the impact that has on another person's system.
Absolutely.
Aubyn, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Felicity. And thank you, Krista. You reminded me of when I met Robert Dilts in the year 2000 in Santa Cruz when I attended his practitioner program, and he had the same impact on me. And I love that model. And I'm picking up a little bit on where Rachel also left off, because what I'm hearing you speaking to is actually, I think it's one of the most interesting areas that's going on at the moment. And this whole field of how do we work with our nervous systems? How do we start to understand and work with and cooperate with our nervous systems, both for ourselves and in relationships? So the self-regulation that we need to understand if we're going to survive in this VUCA world, and also then the co-regulation in relationship to the other. And I'm fascinated by what you're speaking to there, and the whole sense of how do we work in that kind of embodied way. And then something occurred to me, which is that, however good you are at doing that, and however tuned in and attuned you are, then there's also another layer of stuff going on, which is in a way the relational space and how we get triggered or how parts of us react. So we're then going to an unconscious or a psychological level where whatever's coming into the room, we're always going to be, something's happening at the level of our own projections, our own transference or counter-transference in relationship to the other. So it's also about attending to that space, and that's not always very easy to do in the moment and in the here and now of the coaching session. So often we have to come back and we have to then unpack that or make sense of that. But I like the idea that actually often we notice it in the embodied space. Something's disturbing me. There's a feeling or an emotion there that I'm not easy with. What is that about? And asking that and being curious. And I think the state of curiosity and being able to stay open and inquiring into what that might be rather than being the all-knowing coach is probably a very good starting point.
Thank you, Aubyn. Rachel, may I come back to you for any more thoughts?
I really love all those frames. And I just really appreciate, Aubyn, that you came back around to being curious and sitting back from being the all-knowing coach, trusting the aliveness, creativity, resourcefulness and wholeness of the being in front of us to orient towards their own aliveness, right? Or what's kind of emerging for them and supporting them there. That feels like the answer to the question as well, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
I
Beautiful.
would like to just bring in a thought, picking up on Krista mentioned clean language. And we have an episode in the series with Marion Way, who's not part of this panel, but there we talk about clean language. And of course, clean questions are designed to minimise assumptions on part of the coach and minimise questions that include presuppositions. So to try and keep that space as clean as possible, because as Aubyn was saying, and you've all said in different ways, we cannot not bring in all those aspects of our own psychology into our coaching, and there are tools developed to help us with that. So what are some of the ethical or contracting issues that you believe coaches need to keep in mind when working this way?
Very interesting. The word curious has been mentioned, and that's not where I started my reflection, but I will start there because you may or may not know that being curious is a core behaviour expected of HR professionals. And I actually self-assess myself about all of the core behaviours. And I'm off the planet curious, okay? That is one that I'm just doing what's expected of me to be demonstrated as an HR professional. And I mentioned that because I think one of the concerns when you are a coach is that you can have a strength. So, for example, I'm incredibly curious, which is great until it's not. And by that, I mean, just because you've got a strength in something or a particular interest, one of the, I suppose, the key thing to remember is that that's not necessarily appropriate or useful in a situation. So the starting point of any ethical or contracting issues is to be aware of, I suppose, where you are more likely or more tempted to behave in a way that is not going to achieve your purpose as a coach or even help that your coachee as well as other behaviours. There is a premise in coaching with NLP that the coach has all the resources they require, and the explorer, who is the coach's job is to help the coachee find those resources. So the starting point is that. So some points I've made with that proviso that just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should do it. So just because you have the tools, etc., you don't need to use them. Mm-hmm. So it's very much about, what is the best tool in the situation? What's the best intervention to make? Be absolutely clear on contracting. Don't assume anything. I think Aubyn mentioned about people not knowing what coaching is and what's required. The clearer you can be, the better. Permission. So, it's about them having permission. It's for them, it's their space. You might, for example, have a check-in, how do you want to be challenged? How are you feeling today? How much do you want me to push? So it's very much thinking about, when you think about ethics and contracting, getting their permission, their buy-in, their discussion about what they want and need. One of the concerns I have is about questioning. I did an activity about questioning in coaching recently for a group I'm part of. I took in a series of knives. I did my due diligence, and it was an educational purpose. So I could take in a knife, and I took in this huge carving knife, and as well as some smaller knives. And I said, well, this is what you could be doing. This is how a knife, if you are coaching, you could be doing a lot of damage. You've got to be aware that that questions can be quite challenging, can be deep, go deep. And it's that whole thing about, being as light with your questioning and intervention as possible. So that's absolutely key for me, in terms of your questioning. Really be thinking about not doing it just because you can, and being very, very conscious of the impact of any questioning you do, that and be as light with it. I suppose my metaphor there would be, if you're using a knife, it's the skill you're using in it. It's with it, not the knife itself, that's important. And a couple of things for me that I'll put my hands up here: not to go into counsellor mode, not to go into rescuer mode, not to offer advice. It can be very, very tempting as a coach to say, well, have you thought? And it's critical that you really remind yourself all the time, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of is it ethical? Is it fulfilling the contracting brief? Because you are in a position of considerable power as a coach, I believe, and you need to be using that in as ethical, ecological way as possible.
Thank you, Krista. Aubyn, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Felicity. You just reminded me of one of the contracting questions that my colleague Anne Welsh introduced me to, which is to ask the coachee, what do I need to know about you and your history, maybe your culture, that will enable us to work well together? And in a way, it's not assuming anything. It's inviting that level of perhaps reflection at the initial stage. So I think contracting has so much importance. We can so easily brush over perhaps what we assume and what maybe the coachee. What does coaching mean to you? To ask the coachee, what does coaching mean to you? What do you expect from me as your coach? There's a question we use in our contracting, which actually most, even student coaches, even experienced student coaches find difficult, but it can be incredibly helpful, which is to say, how do you want me to be with you in this work? What do you need from me? So that's one piece. One of the themes that comes up around us. So when we work holistically, so a lot of our coaches sort of go to say, okay, so we're going to work with body, we're going to work with feelings, we're going to work with mind, we're going to work with all of the experience that's in the room. And sometimes we even might invite the coachee to follow a mindfulness exercise. But it's so important how we invite that. So is this something that you would find helpful? Do you want to do this now? Not, I would like to do a mindfulness exercise. So it's not making any assumptions. And even the question, so how does that feel And what's the feeling there that I'm picking up? And sometimes it's better to go to our own and say, I'm picking up a feeling. Would it be okay for me to name it and to share it? So it's the way in which we do that, which leaves the coachee in a place of choice and enables them to progress or to go into perhaps the wider experiential space in their own time and in their own way.
Thank you. Rachel, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I love that. I've taken loads of notes. Thanks, Aubyn. I love, what do I need to know about you that would help us work together well? Thank you. That's lovely. One I love to ask, it comes from clean coaching as well, which is if this coaching relationship could be like you'd like it to be, it will be like what? Or if it could feel like you'd like it to feel, it'll feel like what? And then just to drop in a little bit of, again, a little bit of body orientation. In terms of contracting, there's a lot of emphasis in coaching around getting the agreement and getting the kind of, I guess, the buy-in. The client needs to say yes to what's going to take place, right? Or there's a kind of, it's a really important part of ethics that there's agreement. Otherwise, we can't proceed. And just to sort of broaden that out a little bit and give it a little somatic focus, there's a deeper thing there. Where's the yes coming from in the client? This question, can we get a sense that there's a yes coming from the whole person, just to come back to this whole person thing, so that the yes is coming from a yes in the whole being? And how do we attune to that as the coach? Feels part of ethics to me. Yeah, I just want to pop that in there.
Krista, any more thoughts from you?
I really like the phrases. I absolutely agree with Aubyn. It's about permission and choice, and them, the coach knowing it is for them, and doing what needs to happen. So what has to happen is one of my phrases. What has to happen for is one of my statements, i.e. questions I use quite a lot. And I really like that idea Rachel mentioned, this whole person, where's that yes coming from? Because it obviously helps. Well, it helps the person to understand themselves, and it helps you to understand the person. So one of the parts of coaching is knowing where to start in terms of, where's the most useful place to start, which it can be very challenging to do. So that's a very useful way of exploring in a very safe and focused on them way. So I like that.
Thank you. Any more thoughts on that?
There's a piece that then got provoked by what Rachel said for me, which is the other way in which we can reach towards the whole person and beyond perhaps what is conscious or what is immediately in the body or the feelings or the mind is to invite or to evoke the imagination in some way, or to invite the intuition. So the other way in which we work in psychosynthesis coaching is to maybe invite a symbol or an image or a word or a metaphor or whatever it might be, but just what might come in. So we often just create a space in which what might come, what's the image or the word or the symbol that maybe has come to you in that conversation, whatever it may be. And again, it's inviting it. It's not sort of, if it doesn't come, it doesn't come. And perhaps some people will work well with image and others will work well with words and others will work well with something more concrete. So we have to find a way in which to evoke or to help what we might call the emergent for different people in different ways.
Thank you. And I love that note of the invitational and the permission and the which has come through that whole conversation. Thank you. Okay, I have one more question. And I think, Aubyn, I would like to invite you to answer this one first. I know you and Rachel have experience in developing coaches, and Krista, plenty of experience in developing people in many ways. So be interested to hear your thoughts on this. What, in your experience, can help coaches to develop themselves so they can work at more depth and breadth with their clients?
Thank you, Felicity. I'm smiling because I think to some extent the answer is in the question. And you've actually said, what can help coaches develop themselves. And that's, for me, the key for us to work at depth and to work with the whole person. It's actually to be on our own developmental journey, on our own learning journey, to be curious, to be open, to be on our own path, which keeps us in that receptive and open and curious place. That would be my first. So in a way, you've said that in the question, so because so much of the time, coach training and books and podcasts and everything else, is geared towards how do we work with the other person? What are we doing with them? And what are the interventions I can bring? And what are the tools and techniques? And what's the magic question that I can use here? So much of the time it's got the outward focus on either the coachee or the intervention that you're bringing into the practice space. And what you've done is you've named the third part, which is the work we're doing on ourselves. And that's at different levels. That's actually in the room, as we're reflecting on how what's going on is impacting us. So it's been in that state, which we're not always able to do. And then it's being able to step outside of that and be reflective and to think, what happened there? And feeling a bit strange after that one. And maybe and then to use supervision, to use reflective practice to help make sense and unpack that, to see, so what are our edges? Where are we caught? What do we find difficult? And is that something we know about ourselves, or is that something that we're discovering? Is that some new work that I need to do, that I need to uncover? And so there's all of that reflective practice taking place. And then there might be other things that we're doing to develop ourselves, but that's going to come out of that, I would say. So there's the immediate, there's the reflective space, and then there's our longer term journey. The thing that I'm really interested in, Felicity, and I think you've really nailed it with this series in a way, in terms of the different topics and things that you've gone to, is that you can't, I think less and less can you do it just from one perspective as a coach. I love the NLP perspective, by the way, Krista, and then the somatic work, which I'm not naturally able to take on board, but I've had to do a lot of work around. I'm mainly mind oriented, so to work very bodily oriented is quite a challenge. But so for me, it's the bringing together, and I think we're in the middle of an era, a phase in coaching where we're beginning to do that. We're bringing together relational, embodied, systemic, and what I would call synthetic, but I'll use the word synthesis because synthetic sounds strange to a lot of people. So for me, it's those four. It's having some attention on each of those in our own development, and then how do we bring that into the work?
Beautiful, thank you, Rachel.
My sense is that, as just to follow on from what Aubyn was saying, that as a person who's holding space for another human being, I have a duty of care or a kind of responsibility for that journey to be continuous. That I have a responsibility, like a professional responsibility, but also kind of a human responsibility, right, to cultivate what brings me alive as a coach. And for that process to be about following what brings me alive, maybe ahead of what I should be doing. So should can get in the room a lot in terms of professional practice. And what I'm most curious about in my student trainee coaches is what brings you alive, like what really turns you on in terms of the work that drives you, like what brings you alive in the world. I'm really interested in what brings you alive and how you can kind of bring that into this beautiful emergent field of coaching. And just maybe noticing how you might step back a little on the shoulds and instead prefer the what brings me alive question, maybe. Is it Joseph Campbell, the world needs people that are bought it's the follow your bliss thing, and I'm not going to remember it or do it justice in this moment. And then, of course, the parallel thing of I still have therapy. I recommend both professional and peer supervision, that they can kind of bring different qualities in. And just that thing of remembering what brought you here in the first place to train as a coach. There's something in that is the seed that will take you into whatever is next in terms of your interest and your fascination and your aliveness. And coachees want to be in the presence of a coach that is alive in their work. That's part of resourcing.
Thank you, Rachel. Krista, what are your thoughts?
Yes, some really interesting stuff there. When Rachel was talking about the should word, it made me think about, for me, sometimes my instinct or my intuition, I will make the point as well that I find it different doing online coaching to face-to-face, and easier in a lot of ways because you've got that sort of field with the person when you're with them that isn't there online. And sometimes the feeling, you think this is where I need to ask the question, press, and then part of you's thinking, why am I doing that? What's the instinct? Or should I be following, what the script, so to speak, to use that? And I think that is very useful and important to think about all the time, because again, it's always thinking about, how can I help the coachee as best as possible, and what does that involve? And I'm looking at my thoughts about that question. So, for example, knowing from getting supervision, from self-reflection about the impact of, for example, doing things like trying out new approaches, taking risks and stretching yourself. I think sometimes as a coach, it might be very tempting to take the safe route or the should route. And all what I find fascinating is when something's saying to me, this sort of comes from somewhere, and I think, why have I asked that? But it's absolutely the right thing to do, but there's absolutely no logic to it. So that, I think, having supervision, reflecting, thinking about that, because that's a way to actually help you realize what's working, what needs to change. A prosaic response to the question is you get feedback in terms of how you develop yourself. So I'm a great believer in getting feedback. So that could be from other people, from the coachee, from people who observe you, from supervision, fellow coaches. It can be informal, it can be formal, it can be self-reflection. After I do a session, I'll do it as a questionnaire and give myself a quantitative rating. So on different elements, how do I rate myself out of 10? And really that's just for me to get a feel of the session, how I think, what went well, what didn't go so well relatively, so what I might need to focus on. Get qualitative feedback. It's always about getting both quantitative to look for patterns and trends, and qualitative to see what are people saying. Another way is modelling other people's performance. So that's a way. So looking at how other people do that. For example, I once asked some exemplar coaches, what do they do to help them coach? And about 3 or 4 of them said, I take a couple of minutes beforehand in a private place to have, get myself in the mood. I thought, well, okay, that's something I can use myself. So, ask these questions, find out what works for other people. Johari window, look at that. So, what do you know about yourself? Because obviously objective feedback can be very useful from other people. And sometimes the most critical feedback I've had has been the most useful in terms of changing and developing my skills. So constructive criticism, looking for patterns. So what are the patterns of feedback from what's coming from any interaction I have? What are the patterns that will help me identify what I can improve, what I can change, what needs to develop, what isn't working so well?
Thank you. So there's lots of strong themes there around supervision, different types of feedback, the importance of reflective practice, essential. That lovely question, what brings me alive, and the importance of going on our own journey and discovering our edges. And I'd like to contribute something here, to picking up on Aubyn's point about this series and the perspectives. And of course, in putting together this series, I had the luxury of bringing together ideas and approaches that I've played with and learned over the years, and that I feel have been of value to me on my journey. And I wanted to learn more about some of them, and I wanted to introduce them to hopefully other coaches. So that's been a great honour for me to work with the three of you, but also the other guests in these series, because I only invited people who I was interested in. So it was a little bit, for me, that's why I loved your question. They were all things that bring me alive. So, everything that you're bringing to the room, but also clean language. And when we looked at the vertical development with Jennifer and polarities with Bina, every topic I think on this course I've had a personal connection with. It's helped me at some point in my journey. And every coach will have their own, unique set of perspectives and ideas that they've engaged with at some level or another. So I think that's really, really exciting. And I believe that, to pick up on your point about resourcing yourself that you said right at the beginning, Rachel, as coaches, we do need to find the ways to resource ourselves that are right for us, because that's how we can bring more of ourselves into the coaching, and therefore hopefully have more capacity to work with other people. Okay, thank you so much. I've loved this conversation. To end, I'm going to start by just asking briefly where listeners can find you. And of course, each of you have an individual episode. And I do, if you haven't listened to all the episodes, I would encourage you to listen, because there is so much richness and depth there. And then we'll end, if you're willing, with just a final thought or takeaway for listeners. So if there's something that's popped into your head that you haven't had the chance to say, just a chance to give people a takeaway. So if you're willing, where can people get in touch with you? Rachel, let's start with you.
Yeah, so thanks Felicity. My personal practice is Vibrant Body. That's vibrantbody.co.uk. And I just mentioned the somatic school, so if people want to go check that out, it's thesomaticschool.com.
Thank you. Krista.
Just making a note. There you go, Rachel. I'll be looking. The best place to find information about me, the website is thecredibilityexpert.co.uk, which is having a new look. So things are being added every week to it. And also, I'm an active LinkedIn person. So on LinkedIn, Krista Powell Edwards, that's Krista. Powell Edwards without the hyphen. I'm Welsh, not posh, to say something about me. And if you go to hashtag KristaBites, all my posts are there on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Krista. Aubyn.
Thank you. So the website that you can find out more about Psychosynthesis Coaching is called Psychosynthesis Coaching Limited. If you do a search for that, psychosynthesiscoaching.co.uk. The other way to reach me on the internet would be on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to link in with anyone. And luckily, given my name, Aubyn, Aubyn Howard, there's no others. So it's usually fairly straightforward to find me on either LinkedIn or the internet. So look forward to connecting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I haven't shared this before on a podcast, so I will now. If you'd like to connect with me, my website is felicitydwyer.com. And I'm also quite active on LinkedIn and pretty easy to find there. So thank you. So to close, I'd love to open up to a closing thought or idea or something for the listeners to take away. Rachel.
Yeah, so I was reflecting on this, and it always feels a bit high pressure. One thought to take away. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, so what can I bring? And I thought what might be supporting for people and maybe contextualizing is a reflection question. So we've inherited this idea of like cognition and the body, right? Like cognition and the body. And where is cognition happening if not in our embodied experience? And so a little provocation, just the possibility that cognition is happening part of a whole body, as part of a whole body experience, and is just one way of paying attention, just that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. Krista.
I think the most useful thing for a coach to remember, and this is a personal thing, is that the metaphor I used of the knife, where use the most correct and valid tool that is appropriate in the situation, very much focusing on the needs of the other person, their objective, their outcome. Keep it as light as possible. And the skill in coaching is the dexterity in the use of the tool you're using, not the tool you're using per se.
Thank you. Aubyn.
So the thought I would perhaps leave listeners with is, we're talking about working with the whole person. And we can only do that by working from the whole person. So it's a person to person. We're working with the person and we're working from the person. And that is an endlessly interesting, complex, dynamic thing that's going on, so we are constantly in a place of interest and curiosity about ourselves and our own journey and our own development, and that is the key. And it feels like, so there's a commitment. I heard Rachel talking about this. There's a commitment to our own professional journey, which means a commitment to our own personal journey, and that's a space which creates a possibility of a connection at I would call a being to being level. So, we're opening to our own hearts, or opening our hearts to the other is the way that we look at it. We're opening the heart to the other and holding the space for the emergent.
Wow. Well, from my heart, I would like to thank you all for taking part in this panel, for sharing your wisdom and ideas with our listeners. And I've learned a huge amount from hosting this podcast series. And I sincerely hope that those of you who've chosen to listen to it will feel enriched and informed by this series of conversations. So thank you.
Thank you, Felicity.
Thank you so much for having us, Felicity.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our new digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.